Welcome, everyone. I'm Allison Link from Healthy Lamoille Valley, a program of the Lamoille Family Center. We are really thrilled to have an excellent program today and presenters and content and hopefully some community-related interventions and conversations that come from it. We are Healthy Lamoille Valley, and I just want to tell a little bit about who we are first for those who don't know. Brian, do you want to advance the slide? Thank you. We serve the Lamoille Valley region, which is Lamoille County and the greater Hardwick area. Our mission is that we are a coalition of individuals and community organizations working collaboratively to prevent and reduce youth substance misuse and encourage youth to make substance-free healthy choices. As many of you know, a lot of this work in prevention is about increasing protective factors and decreasing risk factors. And we work based on the Vermont prevention model, basically a systems theory model. And a lot of the prevention work is on the outer layer. This is something from our toolkit and showing more of like the policy, systems, community, organizational. But we know that people are coming to this work who are working on all different levels of prevention. So want to make sure that you find your way in as we come to the content today and the material that'll be presented to us. And now a little bit about who we are as the Tobacco and Vape Prevention and Cessation Task Force. That name has actually expanded over time. This predates me for sure, of this local group of tobacco task force. And in the past 5 years, when we got our tobacco funding back in our region, we reignited this task force. And obviously, in the past 5 years, also vape prevention and cessation really has become a big area. We don't only work on youth, but this is really full of tobacco and vape prevention and cessation. So basically what we're doing now is we're bringing together interested stakeholders approximately every 6 to 8 weeks, and we're providing information, informing our local logic model, and really towards developing local collaborative strategies to increase tobacco and vape prevention and cessation. So just an example of even just in the past few months, in October, we met at Lamoille Union and Green Mountain Tech Center. We had more youth there than actually we had adults working in the field. And we were actually informing our logic model with basically listening sessions. And so that was so valuable that then during that meeting, it was suggested, well, we're working more on youth here. What about the rest of the population? So then we switched, and in December, our meeting, actually we invited, after a Cora presentation, we invited Dr. Eli Klemperer to talk about cessation, and specifically with folks who have opiate use disorder or substance use disorder. And actually, after that presentation, we have actual initiatives locally that we're working on with the tobacco kits from Cora and other pieces. And now, and then at that meeting, it was suggested, well, what about youth? We were focusing on adults. So we seem to be going back and forth, but we know that all of this informs all of the work that we do on tobacco and vape, and that cessation informs prevention, and prevention also cessation. They really work together. So with that, I'm going to almost hand it to Brian, but first I have to thank Brian. Brian Duda is our youth prevention coordinator and substance misuse coordinator, and Brian really took the lead here on the research, finding our expert presenters, and doing an incredible job putting this event together. So Brian, thank you on behalf of all of us, because I think we are in for some significant learning today, and I'm really excited to see where we go with it. So Brian, I'll pass it to you. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Allison, and thank you everyone for being here. I just want to say I'm so excited about our research experts today. They are just amazing people. I hope you go on our blog, if you haven't already gone on our blog post, I hope you do and read their full description, because they are some very, very distinguished people. So the way it's going to work is we're going to start with Andrea Valenti. She's going to do a presentation. Next, Dr. Suchitra Krishnan Saran will do a presentation, and then that will be followed by questions. So you can ask questions to the research experts, and then we'll open it up and have kind of a larger discussion for the rest of the time. All right, so our first speaker today. Oh, did we want to do the equity ground rule, Allison?
Yeah, that would be great. So before we start, we just have been making sure in our circles here in the Lamoille Valley, starting with our Lamoille Interagency Networking Team, and then with our Healthy Lamoille Valley steering team, of grounding with equity ground rules. And so some of those agencies have progressed in these. And if you want a copy, just put in the chat and I can send you a link. But we're starting with the Tobacco Task Force of bringing equity ground rules to this task force today. Not that we haven't included equity in the past, but specifically to ground ourselves and recognizing the importance and value of making sure equity conversations and equity is part of our conversation. So this ground rule starts with recognize. We recognize that we must strive to overcome historical and divisive biases such as racism and sexism in our society and ourselves. Everyone is responsible for identifying their privilege and the unearned benefits of that privilege as they are conferred by and perpetuated within racist systems and structures.
All right, thank you so much, Allison. All right. Our first presenter is Dr. Andrea Valenti. He is the Deputy Director of the Rutgers Center for Tobacco Studies and Associate Professor in the Department of Health Behavior, Society, and Policy at Rutgers School of Public Health. He is also the adjunct faculty appointment in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Vermont, Lerner College of Medicine. All right, and I will hand it off to Dr. Valenti to present.
Great, thank you, Brian, and delighted to see you all here. I'm excited to share hot off the press data today with all of you on nicotine and vaping cessation. So I'll just identify my disclosures first. My name is Andrea Valenti. I am the Deputy Director of the Rutgers Center for Tobacco Studies. I'm a tenured associate professor in the Rutgers School of Public Health, and I retain adjunct appointments in psychological sciences and psychiatry at UVM. I'm also the co-director of the Surveillance and Evaluation Core of the UVM Center on Rural Addiction. I'm also a Vermonter, and I'm committed to public health in Vermont. I have 2 preteens who are in Vermont schools and entering this period of risk for uptake of substance use. So this is particularly of interest to me. So first, I just want to give a quick overview on what works in nicotine cessation. When we look at population-based approaches in the Community Guide to Preventive Services, you can see that there are many types of interventions that can support cessation. And these range from comprehensive tobacco control programs down to more individual level efforts like reducing costs for treatments, quitline interventions, mobile phone-based interventions, and internet-based interventions. And I'm highlighting all of these because they're low barrier ways to get people into cessation treatment, and they have been identified as effective means to help people quit. But we're in sort of a new world. And so quitting nicotine or quitting vaping might be different. So what we know, we borrow from decades of tobacco cessation research in terms of strategies to help people quit. And one interesting piece here is that in the past few years, we have changed our tobacco policies in this state and across the nation to restrict underage sales of tobacco products at the age of 21. So one quick question for you. Sorry, I don't have a poll, Can someone under 21 who cannot buy tobacco products buy nicotine replacement products at a pharmacy? You can enter your thoughts in the chat. So I see one response, no, question mark, maybe with a parent, I don't know. Yeah, if you're over 18, so correct, Liza's right. If you're over 18, you should be able to purchase nicotine replacement products at a pharmacy. However, we called a few pharmacies in the area after coming up with this question and identified that one said no and one said yes. And we've actually connected with the Department of Health a few years ago on sort of trying to do some more education. So young people over the age of 18 should be able to buy nicotine replacement products at a pharmacy, even if they can't purchase tobacco products. However, we don't know a ton about how these products work in young people. Adolescents are generally not recommended to use FDA-approved medications, largely because there haven't been a number of large enough studies to demonstrate their effectiveness. And young adults are able to use these products, but they generally don't. So we're trying to identify different ways to get people into cessation treatment. One way that has been really effective for young people is a text message program. So the Truth Initiative launched a program in 2019 where they had a free quit vaping text message program. They saw dramatic uptake of the program. 13,000 teens and almost 14,000 young adults had joined in a 5-week period. And at 2-week assessment following their entry into the study, about 61% indicated that they had either reduced or stopped using e-cigarettes altogether. So this was really promising. This is one of the few times that we have actually seen young people reaching out and being interested and seeking out cessation services for vaping, or for any tobacco use, really. And this intervention, the This Is Quitting program, was evaluated in young adults in a randomized trial. And what they found was that this cessation intervention increased the likelihood of prevalence of abstinence at 7 months compared to their control condition. So again, they had great uptake of this program. They did a randomized control trial in young adults, and they found that this was effective in supporting cessation at a long period of abstinence, 7 months after starting the program. So this is all really promising. I believe they have a trial underway among adolescents right now, but that has not been published to my knowledge. And these are the types of programs that we have ready access to in Vermont and nationally. These online programs and text-based programs are available. So I lead the PACE Vermont study in partnership with the Department of Health, and our study aims to understand the impact of state-level policies and communication campaigns on substance use beliefs and behaviors in young Vermonters. And over a 3-year period from 2019 to 2021, we collected 9 waves of survey data from Vermonters aged 12 to 25. And you can see that some of this spans policy changes that happened in our state. So I'm focusing on data today from wave 7, which was collected in summer of 2021, where we asked a number of questions related to quitting behavior. So in our participants, 586 participants aged 12 to 25 who were surveyed in summer of 2021, you can see here the prevalence of ever use of various products. The lowest proportion was for cigarettes, which is great. About half of our young people had tried electronic vapor products, 75% had tried alcohol, and over half had tried marijuana. Among those who had reported ever use, We had a range of past 30-day use prevalence from 10% for cigarettes up to almost 60% for alcohol. You can see here that the past 30-day use was about 10% for cigarettes, again, and 15% for electronic vapor products. Importantly, marijuana kind of fits in between the two. Over a quarter of our young people reporting past 30-day use of marijuana. Now, of those people who reported ever use, we asked them whether they had tried to quit or cut down in the past year. And if they said that they had tried in the past year, we asked them whether they had tried in the past month as well. So what we see here is that a small proportion, between 15 and 18% of our ever users of these products report quitting or cutting down in the past year. And of those, there's a range who have tried in the past month, but of those who tried in the past month, of those who have tried in the past year, most have tried in the past month. So this documents to me that there is interest in cessation, and also that there's interest across substances at a similar level. Among those, so the number that had tried to quit in the past year, we asked why. What were their reasons for being interested in quitting? And you can see here a lot of different reasons across products. Health, money or cost, it was hard for them to obtain. They don't like the taste or smell. They had a negative experience while using the product. They want freedom from addiction. They want to perform better in school, work, or sports. That they quit for another person, like a family member. That they just don't like it anymore, or that there's some other reason that they were wanting to quit or cut down. And interestingly, health was the dominant reason across cigarettes, EVPs, and alcohol for wanting to quit or cut down. And another striking piece here was that money or cost was at a similar level to health for electronic vapor product users. There is very few people reporting that it was difficult for them to obtain the product. And no one reported that it was difficult to obtain alcohol. And then another piece here is the freedom from addiction part. So we see generally higher prevalence of young people reporting an interest in quitting related to being free from addiction with respect to cigarettes and electronic vapor products, both nicotine products, compared to alcohol or marijuana. These data are really interesting to me because you see some pretty strong patterns related to cigarettes, EVPs, and alcohol, with health being a major reason why people want to quit or cut down. And that does not show up as much for marijuana. The reasons for quitting marijuana seem to be a bit more diffuse than the other substances, which is something I'll talk about a little later. So in line with these reasons for quitting or cutting down, some of the research that I've done has been on messaging related to vaping. And I ran a 3-phase study that looked at how do we optimize messages for young adults about vaping, and then how do those work? If we run a randomized controlled trial where half are randomized to see the messages and half are randomized to other messages, how does exposure to those messages impact their beliefs about vaping and their potential behaviors as we measured by intention to vape? So our first paper was published from that message optimization trial, where we had 2 phases and we tested messages, and then we tested images and messages together to identify messages that would look like an Instagram post that related to vaping prevention or reduction. And we used this measure that's been validated for estimating the likely impact of the measure, called perceived message effectiveness. And this was a 3-item scale that we used to identify the messages that we thought would perform the best in terms of changing beliefs or changing behaviors related to vaping. So you can see here the 8 messages that we used in our intervention. Sleek designed hides a deadly truth. Vapes contain ingredients that cause cancer. Influencers may make vaping look cool, but the coughing caused by lung damage, not a good look. Sugar and spice and everything nice. Nope. Chemicals in vapes can cause cell and lung damage. You can see that, again, a number of these related to harms of the product, kind of responding to that importance of health as a reason for quitting. And then a couple related to addiction, which relates to one of the other reasons that young people were interested in quitting. Our control messages were designed to look kind of similar, but they related to sun safety, which we did not think would have any impact on vaping related beliefs. So we ran this trial in 2020 in Vermont young adults aged 18 to 24. They were followed for 1 month after they were exposed to the messages. And then we looked at how their beliefs and behaviors, their beliefs immediately post seeing the messages, and then 1 month later, whether they had sustained any change in their beliefs or harm perceptions about vaping products. And we published this last year in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. We had 569 participants who were randomized to either the intervention or control, and we had great follow-up over our study. And what we found right after people saw those messages were that the people in the intervention condition looked at the messages for longer. They reported the messages as being more relevant to them, or I'm sorry, less relevant to them. They reported high perceived message effectiveness from the messages, and that the messages both decreased their curiosity to vape and increased their desire to quit or cut down on vaping compared to the control messages. So that all seemed really promising. And again, this perceived message effectiveness measure is related to being discouraged from wanting to vape. But we saw absolutely no effect of seeing those messages on any of our belief or harm perceptions outcomes. And when we did 1 month follow-up, we still saw no change in our beliefs or harm perceptions. And when we looked at behavioral intentions, again, no difference between the control and the intervention conditions. So we had done all of this message testing. We had identified what we thought were going to be the best performing messages, and we saw no impact on the outcomes. What we did see was that a couple of the measures that we included as what we call manipulation checks, things that we didn't expect to be changed by the intervention, we saw a bit of movement on those in directions we didn't expect. More of our intervention condition participants thought that nicotine was a cause of cancer than our control participants, and that's not true. And then more of our intervention participants felt that thought that a tobacco product that has no additives was less harmful than a regular tobacco product, which is also not true. So things were going in a direction we did not anticipate, and were not in a direction that we wanted to see movement. So our findings suggested that the intervention produced the desired response on the message-related outcomes. When we looking at increased desire to quit or cut down, reduced curiosity about vaping, but we didn't see any impact of these messages on beliefs or harm perceptions. It's possible that some of our messages were, because they addressed cancer, because they addressed chemicals, that they may have created some mental maps between nicotine and cancer, and between vape additives and health harms. So this really highlighted to us the importance of thinking through and carefully testing the messages that we are putting out related to the harms of nicotine and other constituents in these vaping products, to make sure that they produce accurate perceptions and beliefs about nicotine and vaping. So in our PACE study, we also asked about current methods of quitting. So back to our group who we had asked about whether they had quit or cut down in the past year, we asked them what they used to quit. And the thing that is so striking here is that there are zeros for many of these cells, and that most young people are quitting on their own. They're not trying anything, and especially want to highlight the text message program, online web-based programs, things that we think would be easy for young people to access. They have not been using them to try to quit, and that's pretty consistent across substances. A small proportion reported using NRT. 2 people had called the quit line. 1 person had used VT HelpLink. Only a couple had reported talking to a school counselor or mental health professional. And then also importantly, only 1 participant in each of these columns had reported talking with their doctor, their primary care provider, about quitting or cutting down on their product. This was consistent with data that we had worked on with VCHIP, where we asked specific questions about whether young people were being asked about their vaping or tobacco use at their health supervision visits or physical. And what we found was that fewer than half of our participants were being asked about vaping or tobacco use or given information about vaping during their healthcare visits. So again, we have all of these resources. It doesn't seem like they're being used to the extent that we would expect. And I just want to highlight another piece of a trial that I ran in young adults for smoking cessation using a text and web-based intervention. So I partnered with the Become an X program, which is run through Truth Initiative, to create a study that was focused on text messaging for young people. And we took their initial library of messages and we adapted it to be more relevant to our young adults. And we completed a randomized controlled trial of 343 socioeconomically disadvantaged young adults who were 18 to 30 and reported smoking every day or some days, had access to a smartphone, and reported interest in quitting in the next 6 months. They received either a 12-week web and text message cessation intervention or referral to online cessation resources. And we looked at how they performed at the end of our 12-week follow-up, end of treatment, which was 12 weeks, for past 30-day point prevalence abstinence and confidence to quit, as well as 7-day point prevalence abstinence, and if they had not quit, whether they had changed in their kind of willingness and interest and confidence to quit. So people got up to 5 text messages per day. We varied the content based on themes that we had identified in our formative research as relevant to these young adults: barriers to quitting, stress management, coping strategies, addressing their reason for wanting to quit. And then we did weekly check-in surveys via text message to understand whether they were still smoking, how useful the messages were, and whether they had taken any actions based on the text messages. Again, we had this randomized controlled trial of 437 participants, and we had really promising results. So in our intervention group, we had 3-fold higher point prevalence abstinence, 7-day point prevalence abstinence, meaning they had not smoked in the past 7 days at follow-up. And we had almost 4-fold higher 30-day point prevalence abstinence at the end of treatment, meaning that they had not smoked in the past 30 days. So again, really another trial demonstrating robust evidence about a text message intervention for increasing cessation. We also saw that in people who reported continued smoking behavior, that we had moved them on their confidence to quit and their desire to quit in the intervention condition versus the control. So this demonstrated a strong effects of a brief 12-week low-touch tailored text message program on smoking abstinence. We also saw reductions in days smoked in people who continue to smoke and confidence to quit at 12 weeks. And even if this is not sustained, increasing quit attempts in this group will likely increase quit success in the future. Getting people to try quitting and having some success and getting experience with the process is part of what makes long-term cessation possible. So the other things I want to highlight, especially in our context here, is that we do have electronic vapor product and marijuana use. Our state has very high prevalence of past 30-day marijuana use in our young people. And you can see here, these are data from 2019. Over a 6-month period, we do see increases in ever use of electronic vapor products and in ever use of marijuana, documenting pretty rapid initiation in our young people. We also saw changes in the way that what people were using, especially related to vaping, with increases in vaping marijuana or hash oil over this short period. And we also see differences in how young people understand these products, how addictive they believe these products to be. And you can see here that heroin, cigarettes, and nicotine are rated the highest, then electronic vapor products, marijuana, alcohol, and caffeine being the least addictive. Rhonda Williams suggested including this item in our survey as well. And we saw that young people believe that vaping nicotine is more harmful than vaping marijuana, and that, smoking and vaping nicotine are about equally harmful. I want to highlight this issue because as we have recreational cannabis, adult use cannabis in our state, we're just a few months into it. One of the main products that is expected to comprise 25% of the sales in all years is vaporizer pens. So I think we're going to see more overlap in electronic vapor product use for nicotine and cannabis as we move forward. We're continuing to track awareness, exposure, liking, and impact on behavior of the existing cannabis education campaigns in the state. But it's really important for us to think about how these things interact, how educational messaging may have impacts on many outcomes, and how we might have perceptions of products that cluster together, and the ways that we can shape our intervention work to support prevention and cessation of all of these products. So we continue to collect data and understand how co-use affects ongoing behavior, but also potentially cessation, understand how we really need to age up our prevention work into young adulthood, and understanding how we can get young people engaged in cessation treatment programs. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Valenti. Very, very impressive, and all the work you're doing is just amazing. So I want to tell everyone to take a moment while we transition to the next presenter. If you have specific questions, you can jot them down, you can put them in the chat, and we'll get back to those after Dr. Suchitra Krishnan-Saran presents. And Dr. Suchitra Krishnan-Saran is a professor of psychiatry at Yale University School of Medicine, and she is also a chair of the Human Investigations Committee at Yale. So without further ado, I present to you Dr. Krishnan-Saran.
But before I get started, I want to introduce also Trisha Dahl, who has been working very closely with me for the past 20 years or more. She is our school liaison and educator here in Connecticut. She provides a lot of educational sessions to parents, students, and teachers in schools in Connecticut about smoking, vaping, marijuana use, a variety of things. And she also disseminates all the information that we get from the work that we do. So if you have any questions, I'm sure she'll be more than happy to answer them. Neither Trisha nor I have any disclosures or conflicts to report. So before I get started, I'm going to talk about e-cigarette cessation, but I just want to remind everybody that this is there's multiple windows of opportunities for e-cigarette interventions, and this figure kind of shows you how a person progresses from initially being susceptible to use to first trying and experimenting, and then moving on to becoming a regular user. And then hopefully, if they become a regular user, we need interventions that can help them stop and prevent relapse back to regular use. Of course, there are also a lot of kids who try and experiment and never become regular users, and in fact go back to not using any e-cigarettes. So there are different opportunities for addressing use behaviors at different stages as the use progresses. Now, when we first started, a lot of the work that we do in Connecticut is, at this point, is developing e-cigarette or vaping interventions. However, we've been working for a very long time on smoking cessation interventions for youth. And I got interested in this about 20 years ago because I realized that there was very little work done with adolescents and youth. And it's also not work that's very easy to get funded from the NIH. And to get funding for this and develop programs is very difficult. But I'm giving you here a summary of all the modalities that have been tried with youth for smoking cessation. And I'm showing you this just to make a point, which is that there have been modalities that have been tried for youth smoking cessation that we can actually apply to youth vaping cessation now with new information that we want to include about vaping. And I'll show you an example of how we are kind of doing that. But some of the modalities tried include, and some of you may be familiar with this, the 5 A's, which basically advises and assists contact with resources. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been tried, which actually works for vaping, for smoking cessation among youth. Motivational interviewing or enhancement, or ME or MI, however you like to call it, has been tried. And MI basically works by strengthening desire to quit and reducing ambivalence about quitting, and supporting self-efficacy among youth. Some other programs are focused on behavior change, where they basically identify where the individual is on what is called a trans-theoretical model of change, and then facilitate them moving up this model from pre-contemplation to contemplation to preparation action, so on and so forth. And then there have been pharmacological interventions. So all these have been tried, but the bad news is that none of these have worked very well. Even for youth smoking cessation. The familiar term that's used to evaluate many of these interventions in statistically are odds ratios, and none of these interventions really produce very high odds ratios or are very effective at helping youth quit. And this is particularly true of the pharmacological interventions, the ones mentioned below, the nicotine patch and other products. They have not been shown to work very well for youth smoking cessation. Many of these modalities or interventions have been tried in a variety of schools, a variety of treatment settings, ranging from schools to healthcare settings to internet mobile phones. Each one has its advantages and disadvantages, some of which I've listed here. Schools really are a really ideal setting to access youth and provide them with interventions, but there's a lot of concerns about things like confidentiality when you present interventions in schools. And healthcare setting, there is pediatricians are can be trained on addressing these issues with youth, but they don't have time. There's a huge lack of provider time and lack of follow-up. And internet mobile phones are great, but it's, the programs that have been developed so far, other than the QUIT program that Dr. Villanti just told you about, it's very hard to keep youth motivated and engaged in most of these interventions. And this is just basically giving you some of these odds ratios I was telling you about earlier. This is a review that came out from Cochrane of youth or adolescent smoking outcomes. And you can see here that most of the odds ratios are not really that great, range from 1.35 to sometimes less than 1. If any of you are interested in knowing whether Chantix or varenicline, which is used very commonly for adult smoking cessation, was tried in youth, it was. We were part of the trial that tested this drug, and it did not work in youth. And not only that, one of the biggest problems we had with this medication was that there were very few parents who actually wanted their children to participate in this trial. So overall, the news from smoking cessation trials when we started our work was not that great. And when we approached this problem, we also knew that adolescents who use substances in general are very difficult to engage and retain in treatment. They are particularly resistant to the concept of behavior change because they do not find their substance use to be problematic, and they really don't see any urgency in needing to quit. So this may be why the more traditional cessation and prevention methods that were used may not have been that appealing for you. So when we started our work in developing e-cigarette cessation interventions, the first thing we did is we conducted a series of focus groups with youth to try to understand their use behaviors, what they found appealing about these products and why they wanted to quit, and what kind of information would be helpful to them in such quit interventions. I'm not going to be presenting any of the appeal information to you, but because we don't have time to go over all that. But the good part about the information we collected about quitting behaviors was that most teens who we spoke to said that they wanted to quit. In fact, most of them said that everybody tries to quit, and most of them had just tried to quit cold turkey, that they don't like the idea of struggling with this and spending money on this, and that they would really like to quit. So that was a good positive note to start our work on. We also asked them about why they wanted to quit and what were some of their reasons for use and barriers to quitting. And this slide highlights some of those. What you see in the bubbles are actual quotes from what the kids told us. Addiction was a huge issue. They did not like the fact that they wanted it all the time, and they had the nicotine cravings. So they did not like the concept of being addicted. Peer use was a huge reason for use as well as a barrier to quit, because many kids said that at least one person who was around them at all times had at least one nicotine device. Stress and boredom was highlighted as something that is a reason for use and a barrier. That many of them said they just didn't even think about it. They were just bored and they grabbed it. And some of them said it was a stress reliever because when they were using the device, it made them stop thinking about everything else that was wrong with their life or what was going on inside their head. And the last point that all the kids brought up was school cues. We all know vaping in schools is a huge problem. In Connecticut, at least, the number of vapes that are collected on a weekly basis are enormous. They've gone down a little bit recently, I think, but there's still a lot of vapes that are confiscated, and everybody vapes in the bathroom. So they said the seeing and smelling, the cues related to vaping in the schools was a huge part of why they used, and it was a huge barrier to quitting. Some of the reasons that they had for wanting to quit were health concerns. A lot of kids told us that they would wake up in the middle of the night coughing, and that many kids who participated in sports told us that they felt it was making their breathing worse. And they stopped for a bit and then found they were performing better. So these are some of the things that, and of course, addiction, these are some of the reasons that they wanted to quit. And then we asked them what they wanted in a quit program. One of the most important things most teens told us is that they wanted confidentiality. They did not want their parents involved. They did not want teachers involved. They did not want administrators involved because they felt that many of them told us that their parents did not know that they vaped, and that's why they didn't want their parents involved. As far as school administrators, they felt if they find out that they vaped, then they might get labeled, and that might potentially stay with them. So they really didn't want people knowing. And they wanted a program that provided education, actually told them what vaping was doing to their lungs. And they also wanted personal anecdotes. So a lot of kids told us that we want to talk to other people, or we want people who have used these products to tell us what we should be scared about. Why did they stop? How did it feel when they stopped? We want to know what happened that made them stop. And finally, they also told us that they really wanted skills to manage social influences. How do you resist when a peer offers you a vape? How do you deal with negative moods and withdrawal that you experience when you try to stop vaping? These are all things that they knew they would experience, and they had experienced when they tried to quit cold turkey most of the times, but they did not have the skills. They had never, and they were not aware of any programs that could help them learn these skills to stop. So, and this is a lot of information, so you don't need to know all this, but what we did is we developed a cognitive behavioral therapy manual, because the kids had asked, all the youth in the focus groups had asked for skills to help them quit vaping, and cognitive behavioral therapy is a great way of both producing cognitive restructuring of any incorrect beliefs they have, as well as teaching them the skills to deal with a variety of these issues that they run across when they quit. And essentially what we did is we already had a smoking cessation manual for youth that included a lot of the components highlighted here on the right-hand side. And we combined and added information from the focus groups that we had obtained that was very e-cigarette specific content, and we developed a manual. And this manual is currently being tested in 2 programs at Yale. One is a virtual quit nicotine program where individuals are getting weekly in-person CBT in combination with incentives for either abstaining or attending the CBT therapy sessions. And this is a randomized clinical trial that will be complete in June of 2023. So I don't have any results to show you right now. But all I can tell you is that we have never been as swamped as we have been. We are so swamped now. We've never been so swamped before, because there are a lot of kids in Connecticut high schools who tell us they want to quit using e-cigarettes, and we have no problems with recruitment. This is the first time I've ever done a trial where I haven't had a problem with recruitment. So there's obviously a demand and a need out there. We've also taken the information from the CBT manual, and we've developed a smartphone app. And this is a smartphone app that uses storylines and vignettes to teach CBT skills. This is at a very initial developmental stage, in the sense that the app has been developed and we are now evaluating it in a pilot trial. So fortunately, I don't have any information from that to show you either, but this is just to tell you, these are some of the products that will be coming out in the near future. Now, that's where our work ends, right? I was also asked to tell you a little bit about what exists out there. If you're looking for interventions to help youth or to help students in your schools, or where can you turn to? So there have been efforts in the literature and ongoing efforts by many groups to try to develop interventions for vaping cessation or e-cigarette cessation among teens. This slide here highlights some interventions that already existed before that were for smoking cessation and are now being adapted for e-cigarette or vaping cessation. Quick lines, as Dr. Villanti just mentioned, you have a quick line in Vermont, and she talked about some of that data. They are They are pretty popular. The National Jewish My Life, My Quit line has incorporated information on adolescent e-cigarette use, and at least their site says they are offering CBT-focused self-help and educational materials. Another quitline company called Optum is also developing an adolescent focused e-cigarette cessation quitline materials and programs. The CDC and NCI have information that you can get from their websites, which incorporates e-cigarette cessation and other tobacco cessation information. They have texts and quit tips, and you can also get linked up to a counselor if you want to quit. These are resources that are available, but most youth are not aware of them. So when we go into schools to educate youth, we actually share all these resources with them. There's another program called In-Depth from the American Lung Association, which is an alternative to a suspension program, which is also being used for this purpose. The Not on Tobacco program by the American Lung Association is another school-based or community-based small group format intervention that was developed for cigarettes and is now being used for e-cigarettes. And there is an Aspire program from the MD Anderson Cancer Center, which is a game-based, individual and game-based program that also covers tobacco and e-cigarettes and educates youth and teaches them how not to use. Other than that, there are some newer programs, and Dr. Villanti has already mentioned one of them, which I think is actually pretty fantastic, which is the This Is Quitting program by the Truth Initiative. This is a text-to-quit vaping program that provides educational information on quitting and tips to quit and stay quit from nicotine. As she just mentioned, it has very high reach and has been successful in young adults. And there is something called a Stanford Tobacco Prevention Toolkit, which is run by Bonnie Halpern-Felsher from Stanford. This is really directed at educators. It can be school-based or individual-based, but it provides educators with information on tobacco products and e-cigarettes and how to talk to kids about use of these products and teach them skills to refuse experimentation and use of these products. So, and finally, if any of you are pediatricians, the American Academy of Pediatrics has come out with a consideration for a clinician's resource. This is a practical tool which is designed to help clinicians support a patient who uses tobacco. I was involved in the development of this material. It's very product agnostic in the sense that it focuses on all tobacco products, and it teaches clinicians how to screen and counsel for tobacco use, how to link youth up with behavioral and pharmacological support, and how to connect them to treatment extenders. It follows a model called the Ask, Counsel, and Treat model. And if I've covered a lot of information here, but if you go onto the American Academy of Pediatrics websites, you'll be able to get a lot of information on how to ask and how to support you. So that is the end of my talk, and I'm going to stop sharing now. And I apologize, I ran through a lot of information very quickly. In addition, I also had given Brian some prevention resources earlier that he could share with the group. So I hope all this is helpful.
Thank you so much. I know for me, Dr. Krishan, that was extremely helpful, and I'm sure for a lot of the other people in this room, it was as well. Before we open the questions up to everyone, and once we do that, I'm going to have you virtually raise your hand and we'll call on you. But before we do that, I want to ask our two presenters, is there anything about the other person that presented today that was particularly interesting to you and something that caught your eye? And I'll start with Dr. Villanti. If there's anything you want to mention.
Well, I always love Suchitra's work, and it's nice to present together. The thing I think that caught my attention, and not in a good way, is that this is a really hard issue to deal with. We haven't figured out how to get young people engaged. I think right now there's a surge in interest but we don't have great effective methods to help them quit. So this is an area that I know we're really all invested in trying to figure out, but I'm sorry that we don't have a silver bullet.
Yeah, I agree with what Andrea said. I would have expected, based on earlier message framing work, that the work that she actually did, the project she did, should have worked and should have shown some movement and effects, but it didn't. I don't know. She's absolutely right. We don't have good programs that work. There are some very positive interventions that are coming out, and hopefully we'll know more in the future. But dissemination of these interventions then becomes a problem, right? This is a big issue because I listed for you a number of interventions that potentially might be helpful for e-cigarette use, but youth don't even know about it. So that's always a big issue. How do you get the information out there?
And I also wanted to ask too, will both of your slides be available for all the participants to view?
Sure.
There's just so much information.
Sure.
All right. So I'm going to start with actually some of the questions that were brought up in the chat. And I think, Allison, you asked the first question I saw in the chat. Do you want to share that, what you asked?
Sure. I'm trying to scroll back to see what it was. So if you're there, you're welcome. I know one of the questions I had, Dr. Valenti, was related to the youth quitting just on their own. I wonder if there was follow-up on that, because I was wondering, like, what if they had supports, or if you have any ideas of, anyway, it sparked my curiosity as like a follow-up question for the future of now, that was something to highlight. And so I was curious if you had any ideas on that. And also, Suchita, if you also have any insights, because you're both presentations just overlapped, in so many ways with different studies, but I saw a lot of synergy between the data, qualitative and quantitative, that you received. So anyway, this question of the quitting on their own.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. The format of our survey we can ask open-ended questions, but the response we get is very different than if we were doing a focus group or an interview where you can really probe into those things. So I think that's certainly something, as you are doing work with young people, certainly something to ask about and something that we could pursue in further research. What does that look like? What does it mean to quit on your own? And maybe people are using things like text messages or apps, but because they're not, they're not talking to a provider, using medication, maybe they consider that on their own. And I know that there's new data out. We should have some data soon from the adult tobacco survey in the state that addresses some of this as well. So hopefully we can get more insight from a few sources.
So Rachel Stern had a question during Valenti's presentation, writing, I'm curious to know more about what the actual intervention via the text program. And Rachel, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that more, or if you have more to that question.
So I can chime in and just say that we used an existing library from the Become an X program, which is a program for adults. And we tailored that library to be more relevant to young people. So we did a series of, we did focus groups and we did some secondary data analysis, and we tried to kind of understand how and why young people were quitting, what would motivate them, what would help them. And so that's what we used to tailor the program itself. So we had We included GIFs in the text messages. And one of the big features was that we asked them early about what their reason was for quitting, and then that came back throughout the program. Remember, you said you were interested you wanted to quit for your family, like, don't give up, you're doing great, or, whatever. We sort of pulled that back in. We tried to make it really tailored to the reasons that they wanted to quit. I don't think I can share the actual text message library with you, but I think it's very similar to the types of messages you would be getting through the 802 Quits or My Life, My Quit, though I don't know whether they use GIFs and things like that in theirs.
I'd just like to add something that I just want to remind people about this too, that even though we are not that successful sometimes in getting the youth to quit, I don't think we should say that what we are doing is not having an effect. We always like to remind people that it takes an adult smoker tries to quit at least 30 times or something like that before they actually quit. Interventions that teach skills like CBT have long been known to have things like sleeper effects, where you learn the skills, but you don't really learn to utilize the skills in your day-to-day life till you use them more and more. So this is probably one of the reasons that keeps me going in this field, because I tell myself we are having an impact no matter what, even if you're not seeing the effect of that impact right away. So there's a little positive spin for you. But I'm really sorry to, tell you guys, I have to leave. I have to run a meeting. So Trisha will be around. Trisha, you'll answer any questions if they have anything about our work. But I loved seeing everyone, and Andrea and Allison and Brian. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Suchitra. We really, really appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so another question that happened during, Andrea, your presentation was from Jane. She said, and this might have been referring to something specific, I don't remember the slide, so Jane can let me know, or maybe you remember this. I'm curious about parental support. Was that a choice for them?
That wasn't a specific choice for them. We ask in other ways about kind of connection and assets especially for our youth participants in the survey, but that's another great point that we could kind of see how kind of community connectedness might support their quitting. That's not something we've specifically asked.
All right, and then Anna Hand asks, what studies have been done assessing the use of peer education for cessation prevention? I'm very interested in knowing the effectiveness of peer ed, for example, college students or 12th graders, teaching talking with 9th graders in high school. And yeah, so either of you can, if you have an answer, you can, but I know there's also a lot of other experts in this room, so possibly for that question, I don't know. But I'll start with the researchers if you feel you can answer that question.
So I know from Yale's perspective, prior to the program that we have now, we did a quit and win program in the high school. We really only piloted it in one high school, but we kind of, we got peer advocates who wanted to promote the program, and basically it was high school kids that wanted to pledge to be tobacco free. So whatever that looked like for them, and obviously this was pre the influx of vaping, more of the smoking, and we had them doing contests, and they would win prizes based on like posters that they made. And they would basically rally other kids in the high school to pledge to be tobacco free, and they'd get a bracelet, and we kind of promoted it through the high school in that way. And when Dr. Christian and Sarah initially wrote our grant that we're doing now, part of it was a quit and win type of program for vaping. And then the pandemic struck, so we had to rewrite our whole grant to make it all completely virtual. So having those peer ambassadors in the high schools and that whole vibe like we had with our smoking cessation wasn't possible. So that was put on hold in this study. So we haven't gotten to do it with vaping. But that's the experience we had with our smoking cessation.
Thank you, Trisha. Yeah, Dr. Valente, did you want to add to that, or we can also open it up to any other folks on this call who want to talk about that peer education and its effectiveness? All right, we'll move on to a question from Tara Miller. Is there any information regarding behavioral health issues and youth involving smoking? PAY are being diagnosed more and more with serious mental illness, and smoking always has a much higher prevalence in this population.
I can just say that this is always, we see this in adults and in young people, the relationship between substance use and mental health. I don't know if I haven't seen anything. You're talking about behavioral health issues or behavioral issues. Certainly these pieces go together.
Yeah, is there a connection between like behavioral health diagnoses and increase, like are you seeing more kids with behavioral health diagnoses who are getting involved in smoking and vaping and drug and alcohol use as compared to youth who may not struggle with those challenges?
Yeah, so I can only say that in our PACE Vermont data, we see higher use of these substances in young people who report depression and anxiety symptoms. We don't have prospective data, so I don't know which order these things happen in, whether they get diagnosed and move into substance use, or whether at what point the diagnosis happens. So generally, the best data that we have right now, I think, is mostly cross-sectional.
And just to add on that, so part of the presentation that I do with the kids in high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools is to let them know that there is, in fact, research that suggests that the nicotine itself is directly connected with increased anxieties, depression, memory and attention loss, and being more impulsive. And because these devices, especially the disposables and the Juul type pod devices, use salt-based nicotine, they have extremely high levels of nicotine. So it's affecting our youth, that their brain is constantly developing until they're 25, much more so than adults.
Thank you both. Margaret Warden just has a comment. I really appreciate what you shared about. I really appreciate that what was shared about youth who are struggling to quit benefit from the process of trying, and that increase success in the future. Absolutely. And
I just want to add to that, because we did focus groups in young adults who were identified to be socioeconomically disadvantaged. And many of them described a history with substance use treatment. And one of the things they were concerned about was, like, when they quit another substance, because some of these people were using opioids, they talked about really needing to resolve to quit and be completely done. And that quitting was a commitment, and that they could not, that failure had such high consequences that they didn't want to take that step to quit smoking because they didn't want to fail at it. But I think this is a place where we need to really support the process and the experience and let people know that FDA has a campaign that says every try counts. And I think that's a really important message to come across. Trying to quit can increase your skills and your self-efficacy in a future quit attempt, make you more willing to make a future quit attempt.
All right, thank you. Aline writes, great presentations. I'm both in Nantucket, Vermont, and starting a youth adult team. To address many of these issues, I've had years of youth work and addiction work. I'm hoping by creating a youth adult committee team that is not associated with any or affiliated with any organization or school in the community, this youth team can help to shift the youth culture, shift the silent code of behavior. Appreciate these resources and information. Great. Jessica shared a link. This is an adult facilitated support group training that I am curious to see at work in a school. So check out that link.
Brian, I'll just jump in. If anyone is using the Not on Tobacco and has comments about it, or to connect with Jessica or the rest of us as well.
Jessica, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I've been working with a few schools on changing policy to be non-punitive and more therapeutic. And so one of the schools that I've been working with has done a lot, and this is their next step. So I do have a school that is probably going to be doing this, I'm hoping soon, because they're finding that, and this is interesting. And again, I don't have the research to back it up like you do, Andrea, but I was, one of the things that they have tried is they've been using the Stanford Alternatives to Suspension program. And what they found is that the pretest of like your readiness to quit on a scale of 0 to 10. So if a student is a 3 now, after taking the course, all of them have moved up. So if they were a 3, they're a 5, or maybe they're a 7. And there were a few kids who were like, I have to quit right now, like just really determined. And this only started in September, and there are at least 2 students who seem to have been able to make that whole quit transition to fully quitting. And there are a lot of students working on it. And I think that if you can get to the point where it's non-punitive and be talking to kids, they're not as afraid to come to you to say, I thought I was doing good, but this happened and now I'm back. And this idea of this support group is something that the kids could go to on a regular basis and kind of feel like they're not alone. And it has very much planned lessons of support. And I just think it could be really cool to see. So I'm really hoping that they do that. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question, Jessica, based on what Suchitra and Trisha had presented about confidentiality? How do you think that will work?
Right. So that's one of our challenges right now is that school systems a lot of them are set up so that if you get caught vaping, and that's a punitive thing, school resource officers get called. And instead of maybe like one of the things that we worked on is like, let's talk to your medical home. Let's look at this from a therapeutic lens. And we know that suspension doesn't work. Like if a kid who's already stressed and struggling is now out of school for a week because they were caught vaping, that's not going to enhance their connectedness at school. That's not going to help them with vaping. It's not going to help them with quitting. And so it's not effective, really. So we can talk about, we want to punish this bad behavior, but if students are addicted, they're not really in a position to stop the behavior. And it also just isn't effective. So why don't we look at trying to do things in a more effective way? So it's still a tricky balance. This school that I'm talking about, they're right now rewriting their policy. And so, in order to make a change to a therapeutic approach, your policy has to say what you're doing. And so they actually have a team of students who are working on the policy development with them. But they have already started implementing the pieces of it that they can. And the stuff that they've done, they're seeing some effect. I mean, they still have a big vaping problem at that school, just like we have at all of our schools, but they're seeing a little bit of effect. And they're also considering branching into, trying to do more interventions at the middle and elementary school, because, kids are starting earlier and earlier, and these high school students that they're finding when they do this education around vaping, they just had no idea. They really didn't know all of what they were doing to themselves. And so if we can educate them about that ahead of time, and like you said, teach refusal skills ahead of time, provide connectedness and other opportunities for these kids, those are all the types of things that may help. But making it non-punitive, a non-punitive approach would really go a long way too toward helping.
Jessica, that's a great point. And that was one of our goals with this current study that we have. I mean, obviously nobody knew at first, and punishment was the first reaction to all of this, but we're learning more and more that nobody is educated on this, including the kids that this is all being advertised to, which is why we're trying to promote to these schools as much as possible to stop with the punishments and make it more educational, which is why, I'll be in the health classes virtually or in person, giving these talks, or we'll do a school ride presentation. They also have after school programs. So when kids are caught vaping, some schools are doing mandatory educational sessions rather than suspensions, which hopefully are more helpful as long as they're providing actual facts. For a long time, when we were doing smoking cessation and education, we did a lot of scare tactics, which we know don't work with kids, because if they don't believe what you're telling them and there's not proof, anything you say to them is going to be invalidated. So it's super important that you just present actual facts. And, when I do my presentations, I let them know that my entire presentation is based on data, and I don't need to give you scare tactics because the actual data is alarming enough. And I think it will surprise many of you. And, I have at least a handful of vapors come up after presentation saying, I had no idea, because this is not out there for them. So that's a huge point, is just incorporating education into these schools, and not just what's written in textbooks, because things are forever changing. You have to be up to date on this newer data that comes out.
Thank you. Those are very, very helpful responses. But Heather has a question sort of following up on this. Wondering, can anyone connect resources addressing how schools are using non-punitive approaches when a teacher suspects a student is using? The teachers are reluctant to follow a school policy when use is suspected but not confirmed. Anything we can drop in the chat. So I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that, or if Heather wants to speak to that. Allison.
I'm not going to respond to that, but I think it is something that we can follow up on in our follow-up email to people who attended today. But I am curious a little more about that confidentiality piece that came up, and what youth want in a cessation program, and those who are not caught, right? And like, how are we supporting them? And if anyone if that sparked anything as for other types of interventions or programs or materials or resources, or what folks are doing or might do based on that data. And then I also wanted to say, with Suchitra saying, just that even the text-based campaigns we saw in both presentations, that the data is not showing that people are using them or they're effective in their cessation. However, that seeing it so many times, and and if it wasn't there, what would it be like? Like how is it supporting? And and I really think that those pieces are relevant, and just was wondering what people are thinking about, like the information that is out there and what else needs to be out there to help most based on the data that we're seeing.
One of the things that raises for me is the and in the chat, thinking about like trust and communication and confidentiality. I think that's why we see these text message programs as filling a niche that addresses it's a confidential thing you're engaged in. You don't have to tell other people. It's easy to get into. But the other piece of it is that colleagues of mine at Truth Initiative were talking about the way that they developed it to be conversational, and the way that they developed the style of those messages, not to be like a bunch of facts given by, adults, but to make it feel like it was in the language and the style that kids were used to. And they told us about several responses that they got, like, I know this is a robot, but I really appreciated the way that you interacted with me. So that was really, that you can sort of achieve that in a program that is a text message program. I thought was great.
Trisha.
So yeah, just a couple things on the confidentiality thing. We had to work quite hard for this study to get our IRB to approve this, but in our past studies, because we're dealing with youth and counseling and what have you, we would always need adult permission by their parent. Well, with this study, because confidentiality was so huge, and we had the virtual aspect, which was great, but we also were able to incorporate a passive permission. So the schools would e-blast out this letter and say, if your child vapes and is interested in quitting, unless we hear from you in the next 2 weeks, that would mean that you're giving your permission for them to participate in this program. So kids were able to sign up without having to worry about telling their parents first, which was always a hindrance in the past. So that's made a huge difference with this study that we're doing now. So that whole passive permission, and then everything is virtual. So we basically do their counseling sessions with them anytime. If they only have privacy at 8 o'clock at night, that's when we do their counseling sessions. So it's more tailored around their schedule and to give them the privacy and confidentiality that they need with it. So that has been super helpful with this program and keeping it all very confidential.
So we are nearing the end of our hour and a half. We have a few minutes, but I want to be very mindful of everyone's time, and I really appreciate everyone who stuck on and stayed for this really, really rich, amazing presentations and discussion. So I'll follow up. We're going to have a recording of this that will be posted on YouTube. I will share the chat and the links. And then I also want to ask our presenters, if people have follow-up questions, additional questions, can they reach out to you?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I really appreciate your time and your really insightful research and information you shared with us. And I hope everyone has a great night, and I will be following up in an email.